Over the course of the last several weeks, we have been looking at Peter's rooftop vision. And the Lord coming to him on that rooftop and showing him that one of the important strictures of the Old Covenant, the dietary code of the covenant of Moses, had been rescinded, and that Christians were now free to eat of all good things. And we've talked about this from several aspects in several different ways, but mostly for the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've been focusing on the dietary codes of all the covenants in the Bible, and how it is that every covenant, from the Adamic code or the Edenic code to the Adamic code to the Noahic covenant to the covenant of Moses, the Davidic covenant, and the New Covenant, has its own dietary code. And the dietary command of the New Covenant is that you must eat of the flesh of the Son of Man and drink of his blood. And so we've gotten a little away from that text in Acts to talk about the benefits of the Lord's Supper, to talk about how this code and this part of the covenant functions for us in much the same way, or in ways similar to the way that the codes of the other covenants function. And it's with that in mind that I bring this lesson today. When Jesus learned of the death of his beloved cousin, the prophet, chosen by God to herald the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the man who had baptized him in the Jordan River, John the Baptist, he was deeply saddened, stricken in his heart. And his response to this news was to withdraw from the world and go to a private place, to retreat to a place of solitude. However, he didn't go to this place of solitude alone. He took his apostles with him. You see, the chronology isn't completely clear, but it appears that, as tends to be the case in life, several things were happening at once. Herod's birthday, it seems, took place at about the same time as Jesus sent out the 12 apostles on the mission of the 12. So it was while the apostles were out preaching the gospel on their own for the first time, and Jesus was left alone somewhere on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, perhaps in Capernaum, but probably further south in the area of Magdala or Tiberias, on the opposite side of the sea from Bethsaida, that Herod had John put to death. Now, according to Matthew 14:12, when the disciples of John the Baptist learned of his death, they went to Jerusalem, which is about 80 miles south of where Jesus was, retrieved his body, and buried him in a tomb. Now, the Bible doesn't say where they buried his body, but according to ancient history, he was buried in Sebastia in Samaria, which is near Sychar, the place where Jesus had met the woman at the well. And that's about 30 miles north of Jerusalem. Then they traveled about 50 miles north to where Jesus was to tell him what had happened. Now, the Bible doesn't say how long all that took, but it must have taken at least 3 weeks, maybe 4. And it was during those 3 or 4 weeks that the apostles were out preaching on the mission of the 12. And when you put the accounts of Matthew, Mark, and Luke together, it appears that the apostles were returning to Capernaum about the same time as John's disciples were arriving in Capernaum to tell Jesus about John's death. So all at once, Jesus was being flooded with information. He had 6 teams of apostles coming in, all excited, all of them wanting to tell him about the places they had gone, the people they had met, the things that they had said, and the reactions that they had gotten, and how many people were baptized, and how many people rejected their message, and sent them packing and so on. They were happy to see Jesus. They were happy to see each other. And they were all comparing war stories with one another. And in the middle of all this, John's disciples arrived and said, "John is dead. Herod had him executed to satisfy the bloodlust of Herodias, that tramp who left her husband, Herod Philip, and moved in with Herod Antipas, claiming to be his wife. He had John beheaded as part of his birthday celebration and served up his head on a platter to Salome, the daughter of Herodias, because she had gotten him all worked up by dancing for him." Then, according to Mark 6:31, as if that weren't enough, hordes of people began descending on Jesus and the apostles. And so many people were coming and going that neither Jesus nor his apostles could get any time to themselves, not even enough time to eat. Now, I don't know if many of you have ever been that busy. I know I have at times. And so what Jesus did next doesn't really surprise me all that much, because he was being hit with excitement, celebration, deep grief, mourning, curious onlookers, and miracle seekers all at the same time. And at some point in the midst of all that turbulence, Jesus, according to Matthew 14:13, Mark 6:31, Luke 9:10, and John 6:1, just raises his hands and says, "Enough! I've had enough of this. This is beginning to descend into chaos. I've had enough of it, and so have all of you." Mark 6:31, "Come with me by yourselves to a place of Eremos and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a place of Eremos. Now, this Greek word here, Eremos, is the word from which we get the English word eremite. Now, that reference may not mean much to you unless you've read Keats's poem, Bright Star. "Bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art, not in lone splendor hung aloft the night, and watching with eternal lids apart, like nature's patient, sleepless eremite." Or Robert Frost's poem, "Choose Something Like a Star." It gives us strangely little aid, but does tell us something in the end. And steadfast as Keats' eremite, not even stooping from its sphere, it asks a little of us here. It asks of us a certain height. Now, in both of those poems, the word eremite is used to reference stars. But the word itself has nothing to do with astronomy or the nature of the astral plane, except in the sense that stars are solitary, silent, constant, and unmoving. That's the sense behind the word eremite, which is an older form of the word hermit. Now, there are several forms of the word eremite: eremit, eremitage, eremic, all stemming from the Greek word eremos, which refers to anyone, any place, or any state that is solitary. But it means more than simply remote. In some translations of Mark 31, eremos is translated a deserted place or a desolate place. The NIV says quiet place. The NASB says secluded place. The RSV says lonely place. But all of those seem inadequate when you look at the full context of Mark 6:31, because there are two clues in Mark 6:31 that tell us something informative about what it is that Christ hopes to gain by going to the place of Eremos that he has in mind. In the DLNT, the Disciples' Literal New Testament, this verse reads, "And he says to them, Come, you yourselves privately, to a desolate place, and rest a little. For the ones coming and the ones going were many, and they were not even finding an opportunity to eat." There are two fundamental needs that people have that, according to Mark 6:31, both Jesus and the apostles, because of their stress and busyness, were being deprived of. Leisure time, at least enough time to eat, to be sure, but first and foremost, time alone together. That's the kind of place that Jesus has in mind, a place where he and his apostles can get some degree of rest and relaxation, but most importantly, that they could do so alone together. Now, most of the time, the way that Eremos is translated gives us the impression that a place of Eremos must be a place that's geographically remote and sparse with vegetation, a barren place. Because the most common way to translate the word Eremos is with the word wilderness or desert. But that can be misleading, because what it conjures up in our imaginations is a severe kind of discipline practiced by mystics, carried out by design in the remotest places in the world. After all, where does one go to find a wise old hermit? But to the sand hut in the middle of the Gobi Desert, or to an austere eyrie in Tibet, or to a place like Masada, the mesa in the Judean desert where the Jewish Sicarii held off the Roman siege in 72 AD. And something like that image can be found in the visage of John the Baptist, who is said to have worn hair shirts and to have eaten a very restrictive diet, much in the same way that many medieval monks are said to have done. However, that's not what seems to be in view most of the time when the word Eremos is used in Scripture. It certainly isn't the kind of thing that Jesus seems to have in mind here, because Luke tells us where Jesus and the apostles went to find their place of Eremos, and it wasn't outer Mongolia. According to Luke 9:10, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a place of Eremos, a town called Bethsaida. And Bethsaida is not in the middle of nowhere. It isn't even as remote as Milner. It's to the north of the Sea of Galilee, just across the Jordan River from Capernaum. This is a high-traffic area with lots of travelers going around the Sea of Galilee rather than across it, passing through as they go east and west across Palestine. And this area was not sparsely populated. After all, as we learn from all four gospel accounts, there were enough people living in this area for Jesus to gather a crowd of 5,000 men, not to mention women and children, probably a crowd of 10 to 15,000 people in all, which is no small feat. I mean, can you imagine a crowd of 15,000 people gathered anywhere in Yampa Valley? The point is, the place that Jesus had in mind when he said to the apostles, "Let's go to a place of Eremos so we can be alone together and get some rest," was not some God-forsaken hermitage out in the middle of the Sahara. It was just a place where they could rest, recuperate, gather their thoughts, talk to one another, enjoy one another's company, relax long enough to actually enjoy a meal, and to do so together in privacy. And I think that that's informative for understanding a number of passages in which the word Eremos is used. For instance, in Luke 1:80, Luke tells us more than any other gospel writer about the life of Jesus before he began his ministry, during the 18 years or so between the incident when we encounter him at the age 12 in the temple of Jerusalem and when he began his ministry at the age of about 30. Now, Luke doesn't tell us much. All he says is, "And the child grew and waxed strong in spirit and lived in Eremos till the day he made his first public appearance in Israel." Now, this little passage of Scripture has led to no small degree of speculation. I mean, A little bit of information is often much more intriguing than no information at all, because it gives you a starting place from which to launch any number of theories. You see, we know from Matthew 2 that when Jesus was about 2 years old, his family was living in Bethlehem, but that they packed up in the middle of the night and fled to Egypt because Herod the Great had ordered the murder of all children under the age of 2 in the town of Bethlehem. Now, we don't know how long they stayed in Egypt or exactly where in Egypt they stayed. But one popular theory is that they were in or near Alexandria, Egypt, which is where Ptolemy had established his libraries and was a great cultural and educational center of the Middle East in the first century. This, many theorize, is why Jesus was so learned at the tender age of 12, when he sat with the scribes in the temple of Jerusalem and engaged them in deep theological discussion for 3 days. This also has led people to speculate that Alexandria, being a cultural center where scholars from all over the land would come to both gain access to the library there and make contributions to the library, that the Holy Family may have maintained contact with the Magi, the wise men from the east who had come to pay tribute to Jesus just before they had fled to Egypt. And through this connection, they would have had access to scholars and mystics and teachers of all kinds from all over Asia. So that it could be that when Luke reports to us in Luke 180 that Jesus spent 18 years in Eremos, that what he means is that Jesus traveled to distant and remote places, to obscure and isolated retreats where he spent a great deal of time sitting at the feet of various learned men. And indeed, there are places you can go today, if you're so inclined, in Tibet and India and Mongolia, China, even in England, where the local people will tell you, oh yes, Jesus came here when he was 15 and studied with such and such a teacher for a number of years. They can show you the exact house or the cave or the monastery or cliff dwelling where Jesus is said to have stayed while he was there. One such story in which young Jesus traveled to Britain with Joseph of Arimathea is the origin of William Blake's poem Jerusalem, which was set to music by Sir Charles Hubert Hastings Parry. And did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And was the Holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? Similar stories abound about the Apostle Paul, of where he might have gone and what he might have done and who he might have studied with in the years following his conversion. As Paul himself tells us in Galatians 1:13 through 18, for you have heard of my previous way of life in Jerusalem, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many Jews of my own age and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. But when God, who set me apart from birth and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not consult any man, nor did I go to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was, but I went immediately into Arabia, and later returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter, and stayed with him 15 days. So we know that Paul went to the east somewhere. I think he went to Mount Sinai to retreat, someplace remote and far away. And according to what he says next, he may have been in the east for as long as 3 years. So the idea that Jesus, during his formative years, spent some time, even a great deal of time, in the east is, and that would be the place of Eremos that Luke mentions, it's not terribly far-fetched. Certainly possible, and there's some biblical evidence to support the idea. However, in the record of the life of Jesus, as it stands, in the revealed Word of God, what we find is that whenever the Gospel writers use the word Eremos, and whenever Jesus himself talks about going to a place of Eremos, nothing very exotic is in view. In Matthew 3:1, we learn that in those days came John the Baptist preaching in the Eremos of Judea. But as I pointed out before, the place where John was preaching was within 3 or 4 miles of 3 or 4 different towns in a highly traveled area. In Mark 1:35, we read, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a place of Eremos, where he prayed. But the place that Jesus went wasn't miles off in the middle of nowhere. It was just a few yards away. Just far enough away for Jesus to be absent from everybody else, but not so far that he couldn't be found. As Mark goes on to tell us in Mark 1:36-37, Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." And even though the Bible doesn't record Jesus' response, I can just imagine it. Isn't that nice? Everyone's looking for me. Well, you found me. Congratulations, Simon, you won the prize. Because Jesus wasn't trying to hide. He wasn't trying to disappear. All he wanted was a few hours alone, a few minutes of solitude, a little time alone together with the Father. And that seems to be exactly what Jesus has in mind for himself and the apostles in today's text, because they're all overwhelmed. The apostles are exhausted and excited, like anyone is when they first return from a mission trip. And they come back to Jesus all wound up, eager to tell him about their travels and experiences, only to be greeted with the news that John the Baptist has been murdered. So that their excitement about what they have just experienced gets cut off at the knees, as they're confronted not just with deeply sad news, but with the reality that the threat of death for messengers of truth is a real and present danger. And as they're attempting to come to grips with all of that, an endless stream of people who don't have a clue are flitting in and out like gadflies, each of them concerned only with his or her own agenda. So many people that they don't even have time to eat, much less time to decompress from their journey and time to process what the news of John's death may mean for them. This is the stuff of which nervous breakdowns are made. And Jesus recognizes the crisis that this is creating, and so he takes steps to interrupt the growing chaos, the growing unrest he and his apostles are experiencing by introducing a modicum of rest and a time for them to reconnect with one another. I remember when I was a kid and our family used to go on summer vacations together, and we'd be on the road traveling for 2 weeks. And when we would return home, we'd pull into the driveway with our camper trailer, and the 6 of us would pile out of the car and we'd begin to unpack. But before we got very far along, my best friend, Timothy, would have seen us pull in, and he would come over. And we would be happy to see each other. And before long, he and I would be making plans. Let's go to the store. Let's go to the movies. Let's go ride bikes together. But as happy as we were to see each other, and as eager as we were to go and do something right then, I can tell you for a fact that on no occasion did I ever go and do anything with anybody the same day we got home from vacation, or the first day after, or the second day after. And why? Because Mom and Dad said no. We've been traveling for 2 weeks, and you need to be home for a while and get settled before you go off and do something else. And as much as I didn't like it at the time, I have to tell you that I was always secretly happy that they said no. That they insisted that I spend some time decompressing before making any plans to go and do anything else. Because that was better for me. It gave me a greater sense of security, a greater sense of stability, a firmer sense of groundedness. And I think that that's what Jesus had in mind for himself and his apostles in Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9, and John 6, when he says, "Come with me by yourselves to a place of Eremos and to get some rest." This wasn't something dramatic. This wasn't anything extreme. This wasn't some kind of pilgrimage to an exotic location. And it wasn't necessarily some kind of super spiritual exercise. Jesus wasn't taking his apostles to Bethsaida for an intense Bible study, or to have a rock climbing experience, or to beat drums, or to walk on hot coals, or to find their inner selves, or to write a purpose statement, or to transcend mind and body, or to have some kind of revelatory experience, or to get in shape and lose weight, or to learn how to win friends and influence people through the power of positive thinking, or to receive some new insight, or get in touch with themselves, or get in touch with nature, or to contemplate the universe and stand in awe of creation, or anything like that. Jesus was taking the apostles to Bethsaida so they could be alone together and eat a meal in peace and rest for a while. It's really that simple. And I think that that helps to give context to something that the apostles said to Jesus in the verses that follow in Mark 6. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they had no leisure even to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a place of Eremos and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a place of Eremos. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a place of Eremos," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." You see, on the boat ride over to Bethsaida, the apostles were already beginning to realize the benefit of what Jesus had in mind for them. They began to relax and enjoy one another's company and to feel less stressed. So they were not particularly thrilled to see the crowds waiting on the beach to greet them when they arrived in Bethsaida. Now, to his credit, Christ had compassion on the crowds, because he knew that they didn't have a clue and that they didn't realize that they were smothering him and the apostles with their neediness. So he went ahead and ministered to them. But as the day wore on, the apostles were feeling the pinch, and they came to Jesus and said, "Come on. We're supposed to be on retreat. This is supposed to be a place of Eremos. It's dinner time. Tell these people to go home already." It wasn't so much that they weren't concerned for the crowds, but they were coming to the realization that Jesus knew what he was talking about and that they needed some solitude. And they were beginning to resent the fact that the people who were following them around were being so intrusive that they were preventing the apostles even from taking good care of themselves. Now, we'll talk more about that next week. The point for today is simply this. Jesus needed solitude. The apostles needed solitude. They needed a time when they could be alone together with God and eat. And beloved, we need that too. We need a place of Eremos too. And that's one of the reasons why the Lord in his wisdom calls us to take time at least once a week and withdraw from the world and spend time alone together with him around the table of the Lord. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Psalm 42, 6-8. When my soul is downcast, I don't evoke thoughts of Jordan or Hermon or Mount Mizar. I turn inward, where your breakers roar, where your waves cascade over my soul, where deep calls unto deep, and I commune with you. Yahweh sends me his faithful love by day, and when I pray to Elohim, the only God I've ever known, he sends me songs by night, causing me to cry out, Elohim, my rock. Jeremiah 29, 11-14. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for well-being and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. Revelation 3, 20-22. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame, and am set down with my Father in his throne. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith to the churches. That's my lesson for today.